Good morning. Welcome, everyone, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, to this session, War and Peace, the Future of the Middle East. Today we gather to explore the complexities of a conflict and the pathways to peace in a region that has long captured the world's attention. I'm honored today to introduce our distinguished panelist, Dr. Nasser Al-Kidwa, former Foreign Minister of the Palestinian National Authority, Dr. Paul Salem, Vice President for International Engagement, Middle East Institute in the US, Mr. Mohammed Baharoon, Director General, Dubai Public Policy Research Center, and Dr. Hisham Hellyer, Senior Associate Fellow, Royal United Services Institute for Defense and Security Studies, and Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Joining me and us virtually through the Zoom, Mr. Tamir Hayman, Executive Director of the Institute for National Security Studies. And we apologize for this delay, Mr. Tamir. Thank you for your patience. For the audience, we will be, of course, sharing your insights in this panel. I will let few of you participate with their insights later on. So welcome, and let's start the session. Let's start the session with you, Dr. Al-Kidwa. Few days ago, Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs in UAE, has announced that UAE will not support post-war plan in Gaza without the establishment of a Palestinian state. As a Palestinian, how does this position affect you? How it's gonna influence the future of Gaza post-war?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you for the invitation. Obviously, this is a welcome position. It's very important that Arab countries, especially influential Arab countries, UAE included, plus maybe Saudi Arabia and maybe others, take clear positions that make the Arab requirements for getting out of this mess very clear. And that, in my mind, includes two requirements. One is the full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, not only ending the war, not only ceasefire and the release of hostages and the agreed number of prisoners from Israeli prisons, but also full withdrawal of the Israeli troops from the occupied territory, from Gaza Strip. And the other requirement is the existence of the state of Palestine on the basis of 1967 borders, state that lives side by side with Israel on the basis of mutual recognition and maybe other things as well. So obviously what Sheikh Abdullah said comes in that direction. And like that, it's more than welcome. It's very important, and I think it will be useful.
Let me go to Mr. Tamir Hayman, since he was waiting for a long time before the start of this session. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Mr. Hayman, has already declared his opposition to two-state solution. Isn't this an obstacle to achieving a lasting peace in the Middle East?
Thank you very much for having me with you with this very important panel, and I appreciate the hospitality and I appreciate the opportunity to discuss that with you. Well, no, Israel is a democratic state. No one personal point of view takes the course of Israel to direction. More important, the point of view of Benjamin Netanyahu or whatever other leaders in Israel, it is more important the general sentiment and the point of view of the Israeli public towards the Palestinian states. And right now, after 7th of October, that's really changed dramatically. It was not favorable by most Israelis' electorate before that. That is why we have a right-wing leaning government. But after 7th of October, all of the Israeli political spectrum has shifted rightful. So that's the main obstacle. And it is because of the trauma of the 7th of October and because the frustration of a lack of accomplishment of nothing through years of negotiating. And let's not go into the blame game, who was and who served. The problem is not one personal point of view. The problem is the general perspective of Israel based on what we had seen on the 7th of October. You must understand, just to give you a hint, when the atrocity, the rampage of killing, murdering, and rape took place on the 7th of October, those murderous terrorists carried on their badge the Palestinian flag. Most Israelis saw that, and that sentiment, as that works, that is presenting a Palestinian state right now, is considered by most Israelis like giving trophy to terror. So we are in a bad situation right now in that term.
Dr. Paul Salem, he spoke about the sentiment rising in the Middle East, but also the anti-Israel sentiment are rising in the Middle East after what happened, after 11 months of war, and it continues to rise across the Middle East. Can the US maintain its role as a mediator, as a fair mediator in this conflict?
Thank you for the question. The U.S., first of all, is not a neutral or fair mediator. The U.S. so far has one setting. It is support Israel. It would support it if it goes to a two-state solution. It will support it if it goes to war. It will support it if it would go to peace. Prime Minister Netanyahu knows the U.S. extremely well. Obviously, he was born and grew up in the United States. And as you saw in his visit to the U.S. Congress, he got, standing ovation after standing ovation from the majorities of both parties. So he has more control, in effect, over what's important about U.S. policy, which is financial and military support, than President Biden has. President Biden makes statements, Tony Blinken makes visits, Jake Sullivan makes visits, Bill Burns makes visits, but I think the U.S. is not a fair mediator. Also, the U.S. has very little influence. It has little influence over what the U.S. does, and it actually has little influence over what other countries in the Middle East do, whether it's Saudi Arabia or Turkey or Iran or other major players. But let me say that I take this as an important, and I might say a positive thing, that to my mind, as we've seen between the Saudi Arabia and Iran, or dealing with de-escalation with Turkey, or the Abraham Accords, I dare say, which were really initiatives from the UAE and Israel that then the US caught up and became the sort of the broker of, similar to the Oslo Accords, which was an Israeli-Palestinian breakthrough, similar to Camp David, which was an Egyptian-Israeli breakthrough, and then the US came and blessed it. What I want to say is that the grappling with the regional issues, among which the Israeli-Palestinian is one of the main ones, not the only ones. We've heard about Sudan, about Yemen, and so on. It has to be led and engaged with by leaders in the region. And I'll end with saying, I do have a sense of disappointment that 1 year into this war between Israel and an Arab people, the Palestinian people, we still rely on Tony Blinken and Jake Sullivan. We do not have any major Arab initiative. We don't have any major regional engagement. There's neither with the Israelis nor in a major way with the Palestinians. And I think this is an abdication of regional power and regional responsibility. And believe me, the US is not the place that's going to solve the Palestine question.
That's a strong statement, Dr. Paul. Mr. Baharoon, how you respond to this, that the Arab world shouldn't rely on Jake Sullivan, as he said, or Anthony Blinken in resolving the Middle East issue?
This session is called War and Peace. War and peace is a duality that did not start today. I think the first recorded one in the region was the Akkadian and the Sumerian, best I don't know, 32,200 years BC. So there will always going to be war and peace. This current war, particularly, is being fueled. It's fueled by money. It's fueled by weapons. Those money and weapon are coming from the United States. So if there is not enough leverage on stopping that war, everyone has been calling for stopping the war. On day one in the UN, Secretary Blinken was against stopping. Actually, the idea of ceasefire at that point of time was not supposed to be even said.
But what about the other party? What
Well-
about Iran and Iran's influence also over its proxies?
Well, in analytically speaking, I think Iran today is less of a rogue state than Israel, in the sense that it has been acting on based on international law and order. This is a new mentality, a new behavior that we've seen Iran doing, and I think it's a result of 3 years of opening up to Iran versus 3 decades of isolation. So there is a change. It's very small. And I think there is a lot of room to improve, but there is a change. But what we haven't seen, and I think you've alluded to this point of that there is now a resolution inside the Knesset as an intention not to even to accept the two-state solution, to outlaw the two-state solution. That is going to put a huge hindrance, and I think this is the value of what Zionist Sheikh Abdullah said, that the two-state solution cannot be taken off the table, even by a Knesset verdict or by anyone. It is an important thing for regional security.
Dr. Hisham, how can the Middle East peace process continues with Benjamin Netanyahu opposing the two-state solution? Mr. Tamir said Israel is a democracy. I mean, he considered this a democracy, this opinion.
Well, Fadila, thank you very much for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here amongst such, because I haven't seen one in operation for quite some time. It's also very striking that over the past 9 months, we've been talking about negotiations that are consistently and constantly sabotaged. As you can tell by reading, and an overall arching problem, I think, of a threat to the global order, if we consider the global order to be based on international law, because there's been a complete disregard of international humanitarian law, the rules of war, as they're otherwise known, in this bombardment of Gaza. You mentioned Benjamin Netanyahu. Benjamin Netanyahu has been blamed by his own negotiators, actually, for sabotaging the negotiations over the past 9 months. Widespread suspicions, even within Israel, that he intends to keep the war going for domestic political reasons. We can go into that more if the audience would like. But I do think that there's a very serious question here that actually goes beyond Gaza. What we've seen over the course of the past 10 months is a campaign that is already at the International Court of Justice on charges of genocide. We've seen suggestions for the International Criminal Court to issue arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and the defense minister, as well as leaders of Hamas. So that's and tens of thousands of people dead, the minimum of which is the 40,000 number. I say the minimum because actually most analysts that I speak to say this is a drastic underestimate, that there are many people that are still to be accounted for, buried in the rubble. But moving on beyond that, if that's even possible to do, we have the issue of the rules-based order. I spent a lot of time in different capitals around the world, not simply in a few Western capitals here and there. And worldwide, Israel is a pariah state. I think we need to be clear about that. And worldwide, there is a tremendous skepticism about what seriousness the West has for the rules-based order. Because when Russia invades Ukraine, we talk about illegal occupation, illegal invasion, which is completely correct, and I'm fully supportive of Ukraine's struggle in this regard. And we're very quick, as we ought to be, in condemning these sorts of actions. But of course, Russia is not a Western ally. Israel is. And when Israel is noted by the International Court of Justice as being in illegal occupation of the occupied territories, East Jerusalem, the West Bank, Gaza, and the Golan Heights for now decades. And we do not react in the same way at all. So I think that, and particularly over the past 9 months, now, wow, almost 12 months of this bombardment of Gaza, there is an incredible sentiment that I think is really quite worldwide, where people are wondering, what is this rules-based order that you Westerners keep on talking about? Why should we put any stock into it when it seems that it's a stick that you use to bash your enemies over the head, but not your allies? And we're going to need that rules-based order for many crises that are coming, not least of which are going to be the climate crisis. But we're not taking that seriously enough, and I think that's very dangerous.
Let us see the insight of Mr. Tamir, since you spoke about so many points regarding Israel and blaming Israel. What's your insights, Mr. Tamir?
Well, just a quick few reminders and comments. First of all, Israel did not provoke this war. Israel was attacked on the 7th of October and with no initial provocation by itself. You can't really support the invasion, support Ukraine over it being invaded by Russia and declare that Israel has no right to defend after it being invaded unprovokedly. 1,200 people were murdered, 250 people and soldiers were abducted, and that's the context of how the war began. Secondly, regarding the Iran, the rules-based state or works, the Hezbollah, which is a proxy by Iran, and the Houthis, which are supported by Iran, started the war unprovokedly. Hezbollah on the 8th and the Houthis on the 9th. They were not attacked by Israel. The first shot from Lebanon was unprovoked, and it was a kind of support. And I do believe that Iran supports Hezbollah and encourages Hezbollah to continue on that war. And really, and talking about rule-based world and who is a pariah state, while Israel keeps on supporting, keeps on providing humanitarian aid, almost unlimited, in all necessary and all available capabilities and routes, which is highly objected by most Israelis because we have our abducted people, and that is due to the fact that Israel works according to the global role, the international law, according to the rule-based world. And talking about Iran, after everybody knows that it enriches uranium and became a threshold state against the international law without the necessary inspection. Secondly, Houthis are obstructing the international trade by blocking the straits of Bab el-Mandeb, and all proxies of Iran work simultaneously. Not that and more. Mm-hmm. Iran has attacked Israel on the 14th of April with a barrage of almost 500 projectiles from all over the Middle East. So just context.
Okay, understandable, Mr. Tamir Hayman. Dr. Al-Kidwa, I mean, Iran has been mentioned many times by Mr. Tamir. For Israel, Iran is to be blamed. For, I mean, even Hamas. Is it possible to reduce the influence of Iran on its proxies, like in Palestine, like Hamas, in Yemen, in Iraq, in Lebanon, without triggering more conflict?
Well, actually, for the previous speaker, everybody is to be blamed except Israel, because it's peace-loving country, it's small country, everybody is attacking them, and it's enough. Enough is enough. Frankly, he has to stop this kind of argument. Now, this does not suggest that Iran is fantastic or is good or is a peace-loving country as well. Can we minimize the influence of Iran on those proxies? Realistically speaking, we cannot, unless there is a change of the political situation. If there is an end of the war in Gaza, and actually, yes, full withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza, and an opening, serious beginning of an overall solution, we can do that, because only changing the political situation will change the actual situation on the ground. But if I may, few quick comments about the
Yes.
points mentioned. Now, on the issue of the state of Palestine, again, the previous speakers needs to know that it's not up to Israel to have this state. It's not Israel that gives the Palestinian people this right. It's the natural and historic right of the Palestinian people to have their state and to achieve the national independence. Now, of course, the Israelis by force can prevent that. But there is a difference between using force to prevent that on one hand, and to say that no, it's not good to have a Palestinian state because there are some problems with 7th of October. That is total nonsense. And it's time to change the mentality and to change the way we look at it. Now, the second point, the role of the United States as by way of compromise. Unfortunately, like it or not, the U.S. still is an essential force. But my compromise would be not to have the U.S. alone, but to have a mechanism that could be led by the United States, but not the U.S. monopoly over this effort. That could get us there. The third point, the issue of the rule-based orders. We Arabs used to say there is double standard by the world against us. What has happened in Gaza not only proved that there was double standard, frankly, it proved that there is no standard at all. And we are excluded from this world, and that has to change. We need to have international law. We need to have rules and regulations. We need to play by the rule-based order. That's correct. Who is destroying this? This gentleman, the previous speakers, and
Mr. Tamir Hayman.
the policies of Israel. The policies of Israel is destroying the whole system that was painstakingly built after the Second World War. Now that is being destroyed because of their actions, and that is the most dangerous thing that has taken place. Now, the cessation of the war in Gaza, ending the war of Gaza, and the release of hostages and the withdrawal, etc., etc. We have a vision presented by President Biden, incorporated in Security Council Resolution 2735. And the question here, is it working or not? And frankly, with all sadness, it's not working. It's not working. And I can say, as long as Mr. Netanyahu is in office, there will be no end of this war unless we adopt different strategy and different methods to
But
behave.
Dr. Al-Qudwa,
Yes, ma'am.
what about Hamas?
Yes.
What about Hamas? How do you get Hamas out of this picture? Do you want it out of the picture?
I always said from the very beginning of the war that this war will lead to new realities. There will be new Israeli government, we like it or not, because this is democracy, yes. Number two, there will be a new Palestinian leadership. And number three, there will be new Hamas and different situation in Gaza. I agree with you that Hamas cannot continue governing Gaza. We need to have different situation. And we need to have governmental structure that will rebuild Gaza without the direct participation of Hamas. And we need to ensure that they will not be responsible for neither the internal security nor the issue of weapons.
Dr. Paul, what are your insights on this opinion?
Well, a number of things. I mean, when looking at Hamas and the Palestinian armed resistance, I do think that Palestinians definitely have a right to armed resistance against an armed occupation and an armed siege. But Hamas and nobody has the right to go after civilians and to go beyond military targets. And I think had the attack of October 7 been against military targets in Israel and so on, I think that would be very much the right of an occupied people to use armed resistance against an armed siege and armed occupation, but not a right to go after civilians in the way that happened. I was disappointed that in the Arab world in general, and I am part of it, I didn't see much revulsion to the extent that I thought it should have been against these attacks on civilians. Of course, we all have very strong opinions about this long conflict. This is at least 100 years old. It is based on a Zionist movement, which we all have very strong opinions about, which started as an East European movement to bring Eastern European Jews and then Western European who had very difficult challenges in Europe and establish a homeland. That's a long story, which we won't get into. But just to say, it's also the case that definitely this conflict has a very long history, but something did happen on October 7. And I think part of it was legitimate and a big part of it was not on the side of Hamas. And as I said, I was disappointed that there wasn't as strong a reaction as I would have liked. On the Israeli side, I definitely understand, and I would think it's legitimate to have an armed response and to right to defend against attack, whether it's Hamas or Hezbollah or the Houthis or whoever is attacking. I get that. But I think it's very, very clear that the Israeli operation has gone well beyond that and that it has completely devastated the Gazan people and Gaza as an inhabitable place. I think the government in place putting the large Israeli public and their different opinions, and I think Mr. Tamir indicated that, but this government and the right-wing government, I think it's becoming fairly clear that they do have a plan for Gaza. And it's largely one of eviction, depopulation, maximum a concentration camp of some kind, maybe some resettlement of some areas in Gaza. So this is going well beyond responding to a military attack. And in terms of responding to a military attack, as the Americans have said from very early on, Hamas is not going to be eliminated 100%, but it's been so dramatically degraded that, yes, you can get to a ceasefire and have
Dr.
Israeli
Paul,
security. So we're talking about a bigger issue. I want to say one last thing on Iran.
Yeah.
No, Iran is a major violator of international norms, of international rules. I don't want to begin comparing, is Iran more Israel or is the US or is China? Okay, but to my mind, Iran has not accepted since the Islamic Revolution the rules of international law, has not respected the sovereignty of other countries, including my country, Lebanon, or Syria, or Yemen, or Iraq. I think it is one of the main reasons of instability in the Middle East on its own, separate from, the Israeli-Palestinian issue and so on. But I do think that, as my friend Dr. Baharoon mentioned, and as I was going back as a foundational concept, in 2024 and moving into 2030, as we see the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Israel, and other countries, these are now mature countries. We have to take the future of our region into our own hands. Of course, the US has a role to play. Maybe Europe has a role to play. Maybe China. But we have to take control of our destiny with Iran, with Israel, and we have to engage with Israel and engage with Israelis. One great victory of Hamas is that as we were beginning to engage with Israel and maybe encourage it towards a better path, Hamas, as you said in your first question, created a situation, and then the Israeli right wing created a situation where nobody wants to talk to the Israelis. And that is great for the Israeli right wing because they'd rather just take everything and say, well, everybody hates us, so we have to take everything. Okay. That is not good for the Palestinians, and that is not where the Arab world should be. We must engage, and we must move toward a two-state solution.
What leverage points can international actors use to shift Iran's influence, to shift Iran's strategy in the region?
I think the main reason for instability is non-state actors. Iran is using those non-state actors for its own point. So if we want to reduce non-state actors, we need to invest in statehood. And I think this is the investment we're making in a two-state solution in Israel. This is the same investment we did in the Abrahamic Accord by investing in the statehood of Israel. It's the same investment that we've done in Syria, we've done in Yemen, and now we're doing with Iran. So this idea that the state leads, the state is the cornerstone of the world order. Otherwise, non-state actors will not comply by the rule-based order that we're talking about. And I think this is what we need to do. When there are states, I mean, we're talking about Palestinian state or two-state solution, because without it, there is occupation. If there is occupation, there is resistance. If there is resistance, there are non-state actors, and the cycle would go on. So we need that type of reinvestment in statehood, and I think that would reduce not Iran's, malignant, if you want, behavior, but the space it can maneuver in when there are, instability. And whenever there is instability, and it's not always Iran, whenever there is instability, you will find people who will use non-state actors. In Africa, in the Horn of Africa, you will see it. In the Sahel, you will see it. It's not always Iran, but it's this ability, the weakness of the state gives space for others to try and utilize it, and each for their own. So I think this is the first one. There is an experiment that the GCC countries have started with Iran. And until now, at least in my own observations, I've seen a good reaction from Iran on that experiment, which is de-escalation, bringing Iran closer to state. I mean, and that is not only action, it's diction. This is what the current...
This is not Israel's goal. I mean, it seems that Israel wants the GCC in a continuous conflict with Iran. Don't you see that?
Well, there is an attempt to, at this point, is to expand the conflict. And there is possibly tactical reasons why Israel wants to do that, particularly if there is a war between Israel and Iran, then definitely other backers will have to come in. The US will have to come in. Maybe the UK will have to come in. Maybe France will have to come in. But I think this is what we don't want. We want to reduce the conflict, not increase it. And I mean, Israel, end of the day, is a country. It's a state. It will benefit from peace more than from war. Counter to what politicians or current politicians might think of. And I think this is the investment we made in the Abrahamic Accord to make sure that Israel sees a working model for a warm peace, not only a cold peace. And it has established. We've seen that. We've seen the economic relations. We've seen the connectivity Israel started to have with the rest of Asia. Israel have seen itself as part of Europe because it thought that the entire region refused it. We've created an alternative reality. That should have been enough for Israel to say that a sacrifice, an investment in a state of Palestine should help Israel more than war would. Unfortunately, and this is my personal view, unfortunately, Israel did not go into a partnership for peace. It went for a partnership for security. These are two different things, and they're not exactly the same.
Okay. Dr. Hisham, do you think that peace can be achieved with the far right led by Ben Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich in Israel now?
No, I don't. But I also question whether or not that's really the problem. Ben Gvir and Smotrich may or may not be in Israel's government come next elections. That does not end the issue at all, as what we've been discussing over the past half hour or so. The Israeli Knesset almost completely unanimously expressed opposition to even the concept of a Palestinian state, which, as Nasser pointed out, is not in Israel's gift to award to the Palestinians. It is a demand of international law. So it's not really something, and nor is it a sacrifice that they need to make. Again, it's simply doing what they're obligated to do. And just as a clarification on what was said earlier by one of the other speakers, Israel invaded Gaza in 1967 and occupied it. It is the occupying power of Gaza and has certain responsibilities that accrue to an occupying power, again, in international law. So the idea that Gaza invaded Israel on October 7th is really quite bizarre in terms of that sort of legal framing. It also places tremendous responsibilities on the occupier when it comes to any sort of response that would take place thereafter. But there's a broader issue here, and I think your previous speaker alluded to it, but indicated that this drift towards the right has been taking place since October 7th last year. No, what happened since October 7th last year is an intensification of that trend, but that trend's been going on for much of the past 15 years. I would argue even further than that. And there are different reasons for that, but I think that that's a reality where you see the center ground of Israeli politics moving further and further to the right, which means that certain processes, I don't mean the peace process, I mean political process internal to Israeli society, have become hardened. And you've seen it take place with regards to attitudes vis-a-vis Palestinian citizens of Israel. That's why you've seen quite a number of Israeli human rights organizations describe the situation in the West Bank as apartheid. Why you see a lot of concerns, again, from I'm talking about Israeli human rights organizations, let alone international ones. So I think that we do have an issue here. And, you know, speaking as a Brit, one thing that within the United Kingdom, within London, that I see a lot of people concerned about is, you know, over time, how are we supposed to engage with this political elite that is shifting further and further to the right? It's not Ben-Gvir or Smotrich. My concern is that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you're not going to see one or two people like that. You're going to see 20, 40 people like that within the Knesset. And you've already seen, unfortunately, over the past year, incredibly distasteful, to put it lightly, statements and rhetoric from the most senior positions in Israeli society, going from the president all the way down. And all these statements are being used in the ICJ case at the present moment in time. So it's not one person or two or three or four. There's this, Paul was talking about, there's a plan for Gaza. You've had very significant Israeli political figures talk about resettling Gaza, actually restoring Jewish settlements in Gaza. And I don't think that that's a far-fetched fantasy. I think that actually you have quite, again, Israeli ministers attending rallies in support of that sort of thing. Let alone what we've seen in the West Bank over the past 11 months, where you've seen more territory being snatched away. I mean, the litany of things, we could go on for quite some time. So no, I don't really see there being much option, neither right now with Netanyahu and his government, nor unfortunately in the near to medium term, unless there's a fundamental rethink within Israeli society about how to engage with the Palestinians, with the Arab world more generally, and frankly with international law.
Thank you, Dr. Hisham. Let me share with you a few questions that have been asked by our attendees on social media, and this is a very. Dr. Tamir, you want to comment on?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Please. I was coming to you, but I wanted just to share a few point of view from the audience. But I will let you speak for 2 minutes before I start.
Just quick two comments.
Yeah, please.
First of all, the previous speaker has forgotten to mention to the audience that although true in 1967 Israel occupied from Egypt the Gaza Strip, it is also withdrew totally from Gaza Strip in 2005 and opened freely the border between Egypt and Gaza Strip. So he forgot to mention that issue, just quick corrections about facts of history. Secondly, it's really frustrating the course of discussion which avoids the mentioning what obvious. We were on the right track, no matter what obstacles there is, and there are obstacles. Also in Israel, we were on the right track. The Abraham Accords and the route for normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia, the integration of Israel in the Middle East before 7th of October highly approved by the general Israeli public. We are on the way, included the Palestinian component that eventually will reach out for a vision of a two-state and a creation of a Palestinian state. Although it was a very rough track to follow, before 7th of October, myself, which totally supports that issue, and other, it's a well-known sentiment. It was disrupted by two rogue players that if we, the more moderate, future-based entities will not acknowledge, we are in a very difficult spot. The two disruptors were, on the one side, Hamas, and on the other side, Iran. Those are the two rogue players that urge to continue the situation of friction, and we must acknowledge that fact. If we want to go to a next phase of integrating what was mentioned as states that want to build the future together.
Okay, I think Dr. Hisham, he has a brief response.
Just a clarification. Gaza continues to be an occupied territory, has been an occupied territory since 1967, according to the United Nations, according to the International Court of Justice, according to the European Union, according to my own government in the United Kingdom, and frankly, according to pretty much every state worldwide, with the exception of the State of Israel. Okay. So just a clarification point. It's not a disputed territory. The withdrawal, as it was put in 2005, did not end effective control. That's the legal term in international law over Gaza, which is why the ICJ continues to say it's an occupied territory.
Thank you, Dr. Hisham. Dr. Al-Kidwa, I wanted to share with you a question. So, we want to tackle other points in this session. The question is, what specific reforms within the Palestinian Authority would you consider critical for its legitimacy and effectiveness in leading peace negotiations or governing a post-war conflict?
We have a group of incompetent, lousy guys sitting in Ramallah and some crazy guys sitting in Gaza.
Okay.
And that is not the way to proceed. Of course, there is talks about reforming the Palestinian Authority. And let me remind you of what noise was coming from Washington, D.C. when many American officials spoke of revitalizing the Palestinian Authority, reforming the Palestinian Authority, and all of a sudden, flip-flop, and they accepted the government of Mohammed Mustafa, who was a decent man, by the way, I have no problem with. But this did not change anything. The system remained as is exactly. The decision-making power remains in the hands of Mr. Abbas, and the new government did not represent any change, let alone reform. So yes, there is a need for reform. The question is whether it is possible only to reform, and what's the meaning of reform. It should be done in a drastic manner. We need a drastic change in the authority. We have a 19-year-old presidency and a 90-year-old president, believe it or not. I mean, in this age. So it's time for a change. And the drastic change could be the first step towards having a really reformed Palestinian situation that goes for elections, because at the end of the day, public elections, legislative as well as presidential elections, is the panacea for all the Palestinian ills, and it has to take place in both West Bank and Gaza together. We propose 24 to 36 months. Unfortunately, it's too long, but after all, we have to remember that we have 2 million displaced people in Gaza. So for them to start talking about democracy and elections, it will unfortunately take some time.
Dr. Paul, has the US a clear vision, a clear post-war plan? It doesn't seem that the US have a clear vision about what's going to happen the day after the war.
Well, first of all, obviously, we're facing a U.S. election, so we'll have to see in the next few months what the vision will be, and I'll comment about that. I would say that the Biden administration, in cooperation, I would say, with Egypt and Qatar, in consultation with Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, and obviously engaging with Israel, has, a few months into the war, developed a vision which includes a full and final ceasefire. It includes withdrawal of Israeli forces over a phased thing. It's a public plan. You've seen it for many, many months. And it proposes a formula for post-war governance and reconstruction in Gaza. As I said, however, the U.S. has proved to have almost zero leverage over Israel, over the Israeli government, or to put it differently, has been able to use zero of its leverage, or unwilling to use any of its real leverage. But does it have a vision? Yes, it has a vision. The upcoming election is Hamas. No, the U.S. and I think Dr. Kidwa would have good answers about it. I think the way they have been dealing with it, they do not accept, as Israel does not accept Hamas in any visible position. But I think they have been open to some indirect formula. Hamas is in the PLO in the Palestinian Authority. Palestinian Authority elects a technocratic government which comes to Gaza. There are ways to deal with it, and the U.S. is open to it. I think it's important to note where we might be heading. If Harris wins the election, I think you will see a continuation of the vision, as you called it, with a continuation of weakness and an inability to impose on Israel. I think Netanyahu would not take a Harris presidency seriously, and he would not be afraid of it. And I would expect the war to continue and the right-wing government to continue doing whatever it wishes to do in Gaza and the West Bank, and possibly with a limited invasion of Lebanon. If Trump comes to the presidency, he is definitely but to say on a Harris presidency, she will continue to talk about a two-state solution and to work for it. Maybe there will be an Israeli leadership in a few years which will also want to talk about a Palestinian state, so that's a good thing. If Trump wins the presidency, there will be no talk of a two-state solution. His approach is Israel, go ahead and win. But his approach also is to Netanyahu, do whatever you have to do, win, and make sure it's finished by January 20 when I come to office. Trump does not want war as he begins his presidency. And Biden, and I think Netanyahu is wary of Donald Trump. Bibi likes to be the alpha male. Trump likes to be the alpha male. And I think Bibi is not afraid of Harris, but he would be a little bit afraid, quote unquote, even though Trump will support him greatly.
I want also to the participation of two gentlemen, Dr. Abdullah Salah and Dr. Salah Al-Ghul. Dr. Salah Al-Ghul, would you introduce yourself? And
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you so much. I'm actually ex-police commander, but since I left my office, I'm interested in the geopolitics, and I got my PhD from University of Kent in UK in international criminal law. So if you allow me, I mean, just to give a brief, actually, many thanks, first of all, for all speakers, what they delivered. And although I was expecting to hear such new solutions, such new ideas about the conflict, actually my question is, since 2005, more than 7 wars against Gaza, 5 led by Netanyahu government. The most of wars was, talk about 2 weeks, 50 days, 8 days, and this one we reach now to
almost a year.
Almost a year. So my question for Mr. Tamir and even your guests here, Fadila, who does not want to stop this war?
Mr. Tamir Hyman, would you answer this question, please?
Our problem right now is that that is all the international community, all of the members, have only one exit strategy from the war, and it goes through a hostage deal. Hostage deal right now is being negotiated by most of the evidence I am aware of. The obstacles that are being once and times again accumulated are mostly by Hamas. Even if after the 27th of May proposal, which was accepted by the leaders of Hamas and then transferred to the media by President Biden, even over that suggestion, Hamas says 24th clarification it needed, which stopped the war, stopped the negotiation completely. So we are stuck right now. I imagine that if there is a hostage deal tomorrow, that it's valid completely, all of the hostages returning back, Israel will stop the war, withdraw from Gaza, and we're going to end this war. As long as that an ongoing situation happening, it is working to the interests of the more radical members of the Middle East, and including parts of my government, unfortunately, part of the Israel government, more radical right wing, that works in their interest. So that's the right now, stopping the war goes to a hostage deal. An alternative exit strategy, I don't see it right now, unfortunately.
Dr. Tamir, let me tell you that I have seen signs of disagreement here among our panelists, Dr. Al-Kidwa and Dr. Hisham.
Just very quickly, with regard to the previous wars you referred to, of course, the previous wars were not as big as the current war, but nevertheless, it was led with the same strategy, to go against the Palestinians in Gaza Strip and not against Hamas. Always was the case. And I think this was part of the strategy of Mr. Netanyahu. If you add that to many things that are being said by Israelis about the whole thing, the whole story, even without the war, you can understand what is the strategy of Mr. Netanyahu in this regard. Now, the second point, the issue of hostages. No one is against the full return. All hostages should be returned to their homes. And I think Sheikh Abdullah had an idea of releasing some of those hostages, at least the civilians, without anything, as a gesture at the beginning, to show some kind of responsibility. I think that would have been a positive position in this regard. Now, unfortunately, it didn't happen. But to come now and say that Israel, Netanyahu, accept the plan presented by Biden is wrong, is completely wrong, because we haven't heard one single public statement in support of the vision that Biden said that it is Israeli vision from the beginning. We haven't heard one single Israeli position in support of Security Council Resolution 2735, which means that they are not serious about it. They are not serious about it. Unfortunately, it is this problem. And again, I believe that as long as Mr. Netanyahu is in office, there will be no solution in Gaza and the war will continue, because it is in the interest of Mr. Netanyahu for this war to continue.
Okay. Because our time is up a bit.
I want to surprise you, I agree.
You agree, Mr. Hyman?
Done right now. If Hamas tomorrow surprise all the world and says, I agree to a hostage deal right now, with no further conditions, then the war will end it. But Hamas does not want to go to that way, because it does not believe that Israel will stop the war eventually. It will refrain of killing and destroying Hamas totally.
Okay.
I think it is the interest of the Palestinian Authority and the international community and all regional members of moderate states that Hamas will be totally defeated, and Hamas wants to do whatever it can do in order to prevent.
Thank you. Let's go to Dr. Sawalha. What's your question?
No, that's my question. I have. Let me put some few key lines, and then I will say something about each of them. One is the paradox of deterrence and peace in the region. Israel finds itself in a very challenging and difficult position when it's trying to make a balance between restored deterrence and aspiration of integration in the region. Recently, Israel conducted strikes in 4 Arab countries. And this is unprecedented since 1967 war. So if you look to the trajectory, I don't see there is an opportunity for the region to be stable if Israel insisting in restore deterrence. So in my assessment, so the more Israeli insists in restore deterrence, the more isolated become. This is one. The second thing is the Palestinian state, the potential Palestinian state, and the Israeli political landscape. I have been watching the polls in Israel since 7th October, and I put many scenarios how we will see the new government. Mr. Nasser Al-Kidwa and one of our guests talking about the new government, and Israel as a democracy, we will have some people or some leaders who can agree or pushing the Palestinian state. I put all the scenarios. There is in no scenario, there is Israeli leader can form a coalition supporting Palestinian state without endangering his survival. And Mr. Tamir Hayman, he's no better than me. I put Lieberman with Labid, with Gantz, with Haredim, and I put the Democratic Yair Golan with Gantz, with Labid, with Bennett. There is no leader. Within the next 5 or 10 years, there is no Israeli leader who can, not working toward Palestinian state, even hinting a Palestinian state. And this is the first time ever from the Israeli-Palestinian conflict started, there is no Israeli leader can speak about Palestinian state witut endangering his political survival.
What's your point of view, Mr. Baharoon?
I think the question goes to maybe to Itmar about the last question on the ability of a Israeli government or coalition that would accept a two-state solution. My position is that without a two-state solution, we will have perpetual conflict.
Thank you so much. Our
Just
time
one
is
comment.
up.
I think
The last comment, please, Mr. Tamir, because time is up.
One comment. The most Israelis right now.
And they're accusing me here that I gave you so much time.
Just a sentence, just a
Please.
positive sentence. To end in a positive note, most Israelis acknowledge the fact that they will have to disengage from the Palestinian, whether it will be autonomy or a state or state minus. That's the final stage. Most Israelis believe.
Okay, the final word. Mr. Hisham.
Thank you very much. Just in response to the question that you asked, if you want to know what happened to the negotiations of past 11 months, read the Israeli press. They're very clear. Israeli negotiators have leaked time and time again, blaming their prime minister for constantly changing the goalposts, which is why we're still here. And again, the Palestinian state is not in the gift of Israel as the occupying power. It's a responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for the distinguished guests and speakers. Thank you, Dr. Al-Kidwa. Thank you, Dr. Salem. Thank you, Dr. Hellyer. Thank you so much, Mr. Baharoon. Thank you for
Fadila.
everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Fadila.
And thank you, of course, to Mr. Tamir. I forgot him. Thank you. Thank you.